For the first time in Bitcoin's history, we just saw a death cross on the 1 week timescale. Now, we've seen this before on the 3-day, the 1-day, and all of the hourly timescales, but we haven't seen something of this magnitude happen, especially when it comes to a death cross. Now, a death cross is much what it sounds like. It's not typically a good thing for Bitcoin. In fact, in this video, I want to show you what all of the previous death crosses have done for Bitcoin and what it's typically signaled. Because when we look at this first weekly death cross, it's already being used as resistance for Bitcoin, and there's a lot of information to digest here. So if it sounds interesting at all, make sure you stick around for the entire length of the video. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Brendan, and we make videos just like this one every single week, multiple times a week. So without further ado, without prolonging anything, let's go ahead and dive on in here. So again, for transparency, I am on the 1 week time scale. We're looking at Bitcoin compared to the US dollar on Coinbase's exchange. Now, when we're looking at this, we have three different colored lines that are going here outside of the candle chart. We have the yellow one, which is our 200-day moving average, and I'll throw this up over here so everyone can see. But we have the yellow, that's the 200-day moving average. We have the pink line, or the magenta line, which is the 50-day moving average. And we have this blue line at the bottom over here, which is the 20-day moving average. Now, a death cross is when our magenta or pink line crosses downwards over the 200-day moving average, or the yellow line. And so we just saw this actually a couple of days ago, around early to mid-February, which is literally where we're almost actively sitting at. So when this happened just a couple of days ago, as I'm highlighting on the screen, we can see that if we zoom out over here and see everything that's happened over the last year or so, this has been a big point. So as soon as this happened, guess what? We came up to this level and we rejected it. Bitcoin almost hit it to a T. And then as soon as it was getting near this death cross, it rejected this area. Now, the reason why I say this is so significant is because those of you who have been around on the channel for a long period of time, if we switch over to Bitstamp, this is typically the area where Bitcoin bounces. We go all the way back to the 2015 bear market. Bitcoin bottomed at the 200-week moving average. We go to the 2018 bear market. That's where Bitcoin bottomed. We go to the 2020 bear market, right? The Corona crash. This is where Bitcoin bottomed again. It has historically been one of the best bottoming indicators for Bitcoin for where it likes to bottom out in these bear markets. However, fast forward to the current day over here, we have broken below this 200-week moving average, came back up to it, rejected it once, came back up, rejected it again. Now we're coming back up for near a third time, or a second swing attempt, as I like to call it, and we have just rejected this area again. But what does this mean for Bitcoin? Well, again, this is the first time that we have broken below and used this former support line as resistance, so there is a little bit of uncharted territories. What I want to do in a second is show all of you some of the previous death crosses on the 3-day or the 1-day or even on the hourly, because those are going to be slightly less significant. So imagine these moving averages as weights. The larger time frame that we move up from a 1 hour to a 1 day to a 1 week, the heavier these weights are going to be, and the more weight that they're going to ultimately hold over the markets, no pun intended. So as we go up in time scale, these moving averages are going to be increasingly more significant. So the 1 week is going to be significantly more impactful than the 1 hour, if that makes sense, or the 1 minute chart. So when we're understanding what's happening here, let's go ahead and actually zoom out to the 1 day, because I don't want to really prolong that at all, because the 1 day is almost entirely the opposite case scenario over here. What we're seeing is that on the 1 day chart, we just had a golden cross that happened on February, what was this? February 6th. So on February 6th, we had a golden cross. And so a lot of people are saying, oh, this is really good news for Bitcoin, and they just ignore what's happening on the weekly. And I think that they're not necessarily like wrong. This isn't a bad thing to see, but we have to look at all the time frames over here. So let's rewind just a little bit, because when we first saw a death cross on the 1 day chart, this was all the way back in January of 2022, around January 14th, 2022. Now, since then, the price of Bitcoin has been massively depressed towards the downside, and we've been in an overall bear market for the most part. Some of the previous times are when we've seen death crosses was back during the summer crash of 2021. Bitcoin during this range fell from roughly 65,000. It fell about 55% down to 29,000. We then had a golden cross where the price of Bitcoin rose roughly 135% over the course of just a couple of months. And then the real significant ones are from some of these previous bear markets. So if we go all the way back to something like 2018, the last 4-year cycle, so to say, then what we can see over here is that we had a death cross on Bitcoin's daily chart around March of 2018. Now again, this was nowhere near our bottom. We still went down for a couple of months beyond this, and we fell about 67% further. Now, after this happened, we had a golden cross on the daily, and it did signify the bottom. So we had a golden cross on the daily. From the time that this happened, Bitcoin went up around 175 more percent, then consolidated back downwards, had the Corona crash, had another death cross. But after this, the golden cross that happened over here, in this case, it was not necessarily a sign of a bottom. So we have to understand that the death cross on the daily is not always a bottoming signal. We saw what happened in the transitional zone between the 2018 bear market and the 2020 Corona crash. We had the golden cross happen over here. The first time it happened, it led to a fake out. And then the second time it happened, it led to the next bull market. Fast forward to what we saw over here, a very similar situation. We had the golden cross happen over here. It was a fake out. We entered into the bear market. Now we're falling, and now we just had our second golden cross again. Does this mean that the golden cross has to have a fake out and then a successor afterwards? I don't think that it does, but this is something that we have commonly seen before throughout Bitcoin's history. Now, one of the last things I want to take a quick look at is just the 3-day chart, because again, this is going to hold a little bit more weight. And what happens on the 3-day chart, I find to be significantly more impactful, because when we saw a golden cross on the 3-day chart of the 2015 crash, this signified the bottom. Same thing happened over here with the after the 2018 bear market, about 4 years later. When the golden cross happened over here, it signified that the bear market was over. So that's one of the factors that I'm looking at over here, is saying instead of looking at the daily, let's look at the 3-day. It predicted the bottom of the 2015 crash. It predicted the bottom of the 2019 bottom crash, and it could very well predict the bottom of this crash as well. Something to note here, the 200-day moving average on this 3-day time scale, and I don't want to go over too many people's heads. I know I have a tendency to talk fast, and sometimes I can get into this stuff and go over people's heads. So if I am, pause the video, throw me a comment, and I'm happy to explain anything further. But this this moving average on the 3-day time scale is sitting just around $34,000. It makes a lot of sense. This is around the area that we saw a previous bottom at. We saw Bitcoin bottom around this area not once, not twice, but actually 3 times, and then use this former support area as a resistance as we moved into May of 2022. So as we approach this, that's going to be a really big tipping point in my opinion. It might even be something where we see a little bull run. We could very well see a little bull run here, go up and even reject this, come back down, form a macro higher swing low, and then shoot higher to the upside. I think that the current range that Bitcoin is trading at could very well be an extremely choppy one, and I don't think people are necessarily prepared for that. There's a lot of chop that can be inside of this little consolidation zone that we're in on Bitcoin, and if we go when we look at something like the daily, this consolidation zone is very clear. It's from roughly 21,000 to 25,000 on the high side. And for the past month or two, we have been chopping exactly inside of this range. So that is something to consider in the, I guess, like with everything included as a bird's eye perspective. So what is the final conclusion? With this weekly death cross happening, is it all doom and gloom for Bitcoin? I would say no, it's not all doom and gloom. But what this does show me is that there's still bearish evidence out there where people can make an argument that Bitcoin could continue to see more downside potential. Doesn't mean that it has to see a new low of year. In fact, I think a lot of the altcoins that we have seen have already hit their low of year. I think Bitcoin could very easily continue to chop around and consolidate. And I don't think it's off the table for Bitcoin to maybe fall a couple more $1,000s. But I do think that the overall worst of this is behind us. Unless something really crazy happens in the traditional markets, it's not looking too bad. And even looking at those from kind of, and actually I want to go to SPX here. Even looking at the traditional markets, if we want to zoom out and look at the weekly time scale, it's very similar. This 200-week moving average is almost always a bottoming indicator for after a pullback happens, right? We saw this happen in 2012. We saw it happen in 2015, again in 2019, again in 2020. And now here we are in 2022. We saw it happen yet again. So unless something really crazy happens, again, maybe we retest a higher swing low and do something like that. But I do tend to believe that the worst of this could be behind us. I know that historically the Fed hasn't pivoted yet, which is historically a pretty bad thing for the markets after the Fed pivots, at least in terms of price and what happens on a lot of these major indices like the S&P 500. So if you're looking for a chart of that, maybe we can bring it up in the next video. But if you're in the Crypt Nation newsletter and if you're part of the Crypt Nation team, then we just put out a chart talking about what happens after Fed pivots, it was either this week or the week previous. But we went in depth talking about exactly what happens after every time the Fed pivots and what it typically does to the markets. So if you remember Crypt Nation, go back to the newsletter. I think it was about a week ago, and we have an entire chart in there that is dedicated to talking exactly like that. And if you want to join Crypt Nation, I highly advise it. We have some links in the comments section down below. You can search Crypt Nation on Google or go to cryptorevolution.com, and there's great resources over there. And finally, we have the DCS coming up. It's called the Digital Currency Summit. Definitely check it out. We have major people coming in for this event, a ton of leaders in the space, and one of my favorites, we're actually bringing in Illuvium, which is a project that I have made several videos about on the channel, especially a couple of years ago. So if you want to see our interviews with big leaders in all aspects of the crypto space, check out the Digital Currency Summit. But that's going to round us up for this one, guys. I hope all of you did enjoy, and until next week, I will see all of you very, very soon.